may have noticed, I changed the title here. It was said approaches to innovation, and then I changed it into focus on innovation on this publicity side of my university. Passing on the idea way I did it is that I wanted to talk about innovation in two different manners. Innovation as a leading concept of the historical analysis. This was perhaps not, you were perhaps not aware of this, but also, of course, of the techniques of documentation. And I think that I switched from one to the other, and I switch back again. And I start off with the techniques of documentation. And the two images that you see on this page are made to illustrate it to you. This one is an image of the southern house, of the southern part of our insula 5-1, the so-called house of the bronze bull, after a small statuette found in the atrium. And it shows one of the main things that, one of the main discoveries we made studying the insula 5-1, which has not been an excavation project, but a documentation project, and mainly a documentation of the standing structures. The main thing we find that was really not known before is the water lines, very rich finds of plumbing and water lines in insula 5-1. And I'm going to continue later on to talk to you about innovation in the kind of water supply technique. But I start off with the documentation, and this is what you can see on the right-hand side here, which is a water distribution container with all the different kinds of water coming in, as you can see in front of the big nymphaeum up on the right-hand side in the plan. And it's shown to you in a 3D model which was scanned in situ. It's still in situ on the site. Well, and just to remember, insula 5-1, where it's situated, you can see its position in the intersection of the two main streets in Pompeii, the Via del Vesuvio, or Via Vesuvio, as it says on this plan, and the Via di Nola. It's close on the other side to the non-excavated part of Pompeii, on the northern border. And it's also to remember that the Via Vesuvio is the only north-southbound artery going all along the slope of the city. And it's also one of the main lines for conducting rainwater down when the heavy rains are falling over Pompeii. Because you have a level from about 30-40 meters and down to sea level, or almost sea level, when you get out of the city towards the Porta di Stovia. Almost, I say, because it's still above. But it's a fairly strong slope. And you also have our publicity to our homepage, and also the site that we're going to talk about. The site where we started off, if we started the work in the city block in 2000, we produced this site. Henrik Boman, who is sitting here, is one of the creators of this site. And we started to do it because we just knew that we were running out of money, and we weren't able to make a full publication with all the books that is needed in print. So we wanted to make a publication on the web, and a publication where we could put everything in, and that made possible an overview for all the colleagues working within the project. So this site started off rather as a way of communicating between us, and not as a means to inform the general public about our work. So it's a kind of a scientific site meant for documentation and also for publication, as we had this idea that we should, when we started off the project, we started to say, we organize this thing in house by house and have archaeologists responsible of making the publication of each of these big houses and on the workshops and so forth. And we're going to make a series of publications. And then we just understood that we would never get the financing to pay to print these publications. Very costly things. So we started off making a first publication on the web. And I think you're able to read this yourselves if I don't have to read it. First need was, or perhaps first, to obtain a comprehensive, open and easily manageable digital archive. And it's very easy, so all of us without first technological skills can enter it and almost write down with only very restricted number of specialized signs. We're able to enter all kinds of information into this base. And also to make changes within it. The administrative tool is very simple. And the optimal idea when we started to find out that it was so very easily handled, and was also the idea that we should perhaps try to propagate the idea about this site and have it adopted by more people working in Pompeii, because one of the big difficulties working in Pompeii is that we have so many different ways of attacking the problem, since it's so rich. Yes. There are also very many different kinds of databases, and when you produce one in one team and you produce another in another team, and then it's very difficult to communicate between the different teams. Our idea about the structure of this site, the following. You can see the different colors on the plan. Here are the different main houses of our insula. The bronze bull on the southern part of it, and then you have the double house, the iconic one for all English Latin pupils, I think, the house of Cecilius Jucundus coming up in second, and the red one up on the north side is the house of the Greek epigrams, which is also quite well known to scholars of Pompeii because of these poems written into one of the small banquet rooms on the peristyle garden. And then we have furthermore two houses, a small Carpona and inn in white, a bakery, former atrium house in red, in green, and then the workshops going all around, and then finally another small atrium house on the south. Yeah. The idea with this page was that one should enter the discussion on the generalities and finish off in details. So we have three different levels: the city block, the house, and the room. And when we enter this, well, I could have put you into it, but when we enter it, we enter into the city block, and you can click into the house, you can click into a room, and you can click further off, and you have photographs showing every wall: north wall, east wall, south wall, west wall, and the floor. Looks like this. Here we are inside one of the rooms, and we have the photographer going around making photographs and making photograph montages of all the walls, so that without distortion you could study them. And the idea was also to diminish the time you spend in the field, because it's very expensive, and you can go home and you can make a study, and you can have an overall view. You can have a kind of an overall view which is not easy to obtain on site itself because of the high walls. So you enter first into the documentation of Insula 5.1, then you turn to the house you want to see, either by, you could do it by the plan over there. You have the house of the south house of Cecilius Jucundus. It's a double atrium house, activated here, and then you can enter whatever room you want, either by the plan or by this kind of scrolled review of all the rooms, and then opens the possibility to look at the different walls. It's very easy. The montages, as I said, was made by the photographer, as you can see him working here on the floor in the house of the Greek epigrams. He's standing on a ladder, and he's making this photographs of the Cocciupesto floor. This is a very small room, so it was sufficient for him to have two photographs to take himself off the print and have the reconstructed floor as you see it on the right hand side. elaborate montage of the full of the full vista of the northern flank of the peristyle of the house, the big epigraph. I don't know if it's possible to have the lights away a bit so the slides can be fully read. Oh, that's better.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, this is the phase 2. This is the phase 1. This is where we stopped. I mean, this we started off with in 2007. The fieldwork itself in 2000, and this structure was made in 2007. In 2009, I think it was sufficiently well equipped to start to have a full first overview. And the first overview article on the insula was made in 2010. I mean, this is very quick work for studying. I mean, just for studying one house in Pompeii, traditionally you should have put in at least 10 years. I mean, not perhaps working on it all the time, but working on it in part time. Well, I should change over. Take this one away, and I open the other one. I hope.
But down the bottom.
Down at the bottom.
We've opened up the files somewhere in the bottom.
Okay. No, I didn't open that one. Will I find it here?
Oh, okay.
Doesn't let me enter.
Close the other one.
Måste stänga det andra fönstret.
Okay. Sorry, wasting your time here. Because, I mean, that part, the first overview article, and what I want to do is to switch from the documentation work. I go back to the phase 2 and to the scanning operations after telling you about the conclusions made, only starting off with the information given by the first kind of phase 1 of our phase of our documentation, which was created by means of the first site which you will find online, still to be completed. Innovation then, this time as a leading concept of the historical analysis, and in this case we wanted to approach, to see the whole insula as one, not as different kinds of houses, but as one. We wanted to spot change in this insula over time, and we wanted to see when change occurred in more than one house, in more than one property, and to start to talk about the changes which might have impact on society and on domestic life in Pompeii. And in this we were, of course, more or less conducted by discussions on archaeological theory, on the agency of things, and we're trying to make, to see, as the title says, materiality in action. It doesn't say so, but we started off with this, and it turned out that we could see general changes within this insula during its 200 or 300 years of history, which were linked to the infrastructures. So the infrastructures in the following section here will be treated as material agents. And we're rather first-hand interested in the thoroughfares and the water supplies, because it's possible to talk about 4 different periods in this insula concerning how it was lived and how it was exploited. And it started off with the 2 main arteries, the Via di Nola and the Vicolo del Noce d'Argento. And I don't have something to show you really.
Use the cursor.
What?
Use the mouse.
Yeah, I use the mouse. The Via di Nola, the 2, well, you can't see it on this Google Earth image, but the important thing is the heavy slope going from north to south, as I told you. And it's quite natural that in the early days, one could perhaps even talk of the pre-urbanized days, the most important thoroughfares of this city was the east-west going ones, because they permitted to travel on a level scale. So it's not very surprising to find that the oldest houses, the oldest remains, are on the Via di Nola and up on the extreme north here. The second thing happening here, this is the house of the Bronze Bull on the southern side, which is the most magnificent part of this insula. You see the big tufa period pillars of the house extending 5 from its first creation, someone in the 2nd century before the current era. On the northern edge, instead, we have much simpler construction methods used. Interesting things here to see is that this northern part was initially more important than in the late periods of this insula. You can see there are 2 very big doorways. The separation into 2 of this one is a late thing, and another thing over here. You can see them also on the photographical montage over here. So they had large openings towards this northern side of the insula, original. Then we have a second phase, which is the phase of the covering urbanization up in our parts. And what you see here is a long montage of this eastern boundary wall of Insula 5-1. Starts out in the south, up here, showing, remember, the tufa blocks of the big, of the Casa del Torello, the house of the Bronze Bull. And it's very easy to spot that there are 3 periods here, 3 houses, or 4 houses, I'd say rather. The first one takes the whole side here, finishes up in this back entrance to the house of the Bronze Bull. So rather, I don't know if you can spot it, but we have a very clear break here. And this is the south house of Pecillus Jucundus, and it's built onto the standing wall, the northern wall of the house of Torello. So it's rather easy to see that this was for the oldest one. This one was just positioned against it. And then we have a new boundary here, showing a pillar with blocks that are entering the masonry on both sides, showing more or less that this was made in one and the same period. This is the so-called northern house, and we call it the northern house. It was annexed to the house of Pecillus Jucundus. And it's very easy to see also that there's a difference in the material used here for the next house, which comes and is positioned straight onto the neighbor. They are using the same boundary walls. It's not 2 walls taken one beside the other, but they use the same boundary wall. And in this way you can see how the city block was urbanized from the Via di Nola in the south towards the north. And in the north, as you can't see on this position, but you saw on the montage just before, how it was, it encountered another smaller building already standing there, which is, you see up here, this one. Here we had probably one of the oldest parts of the insula, a very modest building, but still part of the old town. So, the impetus for this urbanization must of course have been the economic growth following upon the Pompeii being an ally to the Romans in the conquest of the East, and also all the flourishing economy of the 2nd century BCE. Then we have the next phase, something happening in this insula. In this slide you can see somewhat, you can appreciate somewhat of the slope towards the Vesuvio in the background. And it's getting really steep when you leave our insula and go further off towards the Porta Vesuvio. And what we try to find out is, well, what we realized is that we had a change of orientation of the houses coming on. When the doorways we looked at earlier up in the northern part, this one was filled in and the other one was becoming a back door instead of what seems to be earlier be a main door. You have here the plan of the so-called House of the Greek Epigrams, and you can see how it's changing focus, and the main door is now opening towards the Via Vesuvio. Now, this is a thing that probably has to do with the first paving of this street. Further up in north towards the Porta Vesuvio, the German scholars have made excavations showing that this street was paved in two periods. First period probably Republican, and the second one later on in the early imperial period. And it would seem as though the streets of Rome are not paved Pompeii are not paved in the same at the same moment. It would seem as though as the Via di Nola, as one of the most important early arteries of the city, was paved much earlier, and this one coming up late, probably after or in connection with Pompeii becoming a Roman colony. We have this is the Via Vesuvio one rainy day, close to the intersection. The water can be even more heavy onto it. It's really flowing quickly now, and you can see that if the street wasn't paved, it would have been very difficult to go to use it for whatever purpose with heavier loads. And it's perhaps not it's not surprising that we have this oblique street, the Via dei Vetti, goes towards Porta Vesuvio, which would have been a bit easier to use for the variability. Of course, dating is always difficult when you don't excavate, but still, in these street pavements, you have just a bit further on, close to the baths, the central baths, which are opposite our insula. If you go to the south, you have these inscriptions in the pavement, ex calendis finctilibus, which shows a dating which is pre the murder of Caesar, because after the murder of Caesar, the month of Finctilius was renamed to July. So this fits well with an idea that the first paving of Via Vesuvio was made during or just after the colony was made in Pompeii, and it would also fit well, I think, with things going on by the Via delle Tombe, where there's changing the way of the street or the direction of the street, and also when you go out to see outside Pompeii how they are changing the century outside the city. It was kind of work going on with the installation of the Republic. So, social war during and installation of the colony, and probably the paving of the street. And then we have perhaps the most interesting thing for us, because we haven't been excavating, as I say. We have really looked at the standing structures, and most of them are, of course, telling us stories about the late period of Pompeii, of the imperial days. And then we have the introduction of the aqueduct water into the city. This is the big water tower. No, it doesn't matter. If you can keep awake, it's better for the slides, and you haven't have too much of it. Come back, yeah. Too much.
Press one of those buttons.
Which one?
I'm going to try to find it.
150? Okay. This is the water tower, which is closest. We have two of them. On this map, you can see all the water towers of the aqueduct that they're standing today, and down via Vesuvio and via the Slavia, you can see there are a series of them because they're following the slope down. And we have two of them just close to insula 5-1 over here. The one you see here, this other one, and one of the biggest in Pompeii. You can also still see all the imprints of the lead tubes coming down from the big lead reservoir which was once positioned on top of this water tower. I mean, these water towers are much discussed because the technology is such a fascinating part of Pompeii's contribution to the art of engineering, and also because of the big fountains found within the houses. So we're back into this plan of the Casa del Torello, which has the most magnificent of all our water plays in Insula 5-1. All the three big houses of the insula have aqueduct water led into them in the early imperial days, not in the Augustine days as we say that the aqueduct arrived in Pompeii, but someone like probably a bit later, like in the days of Tiberius or so forth, a bit later. And the one in the Casa del Torello is perhaps absolutely the most well-known because all this is a big museum. We saw the water distributor just earlier, and much has been written about the magnificence of all these fountains inside the private houses in Pompeii. And if you have this, it's a balloon build of the Casa del Torello at the ground floor. You see the water tower over here, the street fountain down there, and you have the big museum showing here under this roof, which is now coming down, as you see, as many things belonging to older restorations in Pompeii. And we have been able to follow the water coming inside this house from the water tower, not inside, it's under the street, which we haven't excavated, but coming under the workshops here into the kitchen area, which is, well, I mean, this is a house of itself, but the water comes beneath the floors here inside the kitchen area of the house of the bronze bull, and we found these very nice distribution boxes here, and under the kitchen bench, and then it continues towards the nymphaeum, where we have this other box, and it also is led from here into this smaller atrium house here, into a fountain here, another fountain over there, and then out again, and wastewater are collected in the workshops all around, showing that this was one big property with a series of big workshops around it, collected probably with the same owner. So this is spectacular. But even more interesting, I'd say, is that the water can be seen as an actor changing the way of social life in the city block, because we can follow the city block down to the first, or this part of the city block, which is the Casa del Torello de Bronzo, the bronze bull, house of the bronze bull, down to its first coming into being in the 2nd century BCE, and it's possible to see that all these workshops that you have along this line are standing on the same foundation. And we also have cisterns showing that they were related. The cisterns are big cisterns in Pompeii, mostly go back to the first period of construction of the houses. So we can see we have one stable property from the earliest days down to the imperial times, and we can also see that when the water is coming in, there's also a change in the ways of living, because all these parts, probably after the earthquake, the fatal earthquake of 62, the Carniera of 63 if you want, probably destroyed part of this street front, and it was reconstructed, and it was reconstructed in a new way without any communication with the houses beyond. And instead we have this construction, as you see up here, of a 2nd story. You can see the doorway over here, and you have another one up above in the house just beside it, and with an entrance from this side and without communication, and it's standing above the rooms that formerly probably were, well, these rooms are still opening onto this atrium, but up above they must have had a blind wall, and then they were turned towards the street. So you have a new kind of living here for the modest, if you want to know, well, the people who aren't more dependent on the water supply, I'd say, of the big houses, of the atrium, and on the rain collecting function of the atriums. And we have this also very modern way of providing for the people living up here, perhaps to be seen as the clientele of these rich property owners who are living, or at least receiving, in this house. And you see how they have installed this nice second story latrina for use of the people living here. It's nice to see. You can't see it really properly, but there's another latrina down here on the first floor, and then if you go up and you lived up above, you had this opportunity also on the second floor. Yeah, well, same thing, showing even clearer here the opening towards the rooms positioned above the atrium, but facing the street and facing this new kind of apartments constructed here. So we have we could say, can also see at the same period, largely same period, we have a tendency to wall up doorways between workshops and the interior of the insula, as you can see it on this plan. The small blue lines show where there were earlier openings, so you could communicate through the workshops into the atrium interior. Now they're closed down, and it's also, we have one here too, interesting to see that all this newly reconstructed workshops down here that we just looked at. I mean, the beautiful latrina with its vaulted ceiling is over here. All these are constructed from the beginning without communication inwards towards the center of the insula. And furthermore, we have this closing up on the house of the Greek epigrams, but this was not closing up, but we have this separation on the big doorway 11 into two doorways, and the staircase up on the second floor of this, and a new apartment also above the northern rear entrance to the house of the Greek epigrams, with also its second story latrine above. You can see the shaft of the latrina. It's used on the first floor, but then the ground floor, but also up on the second floor. So we have a new way of living. And finally, what we try to say is that the important thing about this last, acting part, innovation, introduced with the water, where the aqueduct itself may be seen as a material actor, is not as much perhaps the big fountains within the houses, but perhaps the most important thing with this aqueduct are the street fountains, which allowed people to have a water supply without communicating inwards towards the atrium. Possible hypothesis. This is a drawing of the same street corner as you just saw, the reconstructed southwestern street corner of Insula 5-1. This aquarelle or watercolor was made in 1884 by a Swedish architect, sent by the Swedish Art Academy to school himself in Pompeii, and it shows the Via di Nola, and it also shows the Via Vesuvio on this important water basin. And it will take us back, I suppose, to the first, I hope, to the first of my two PowerPoints in this nice communicating way, as it shows also the interior. We have this other watercolor by the same architects showing the state of the peristyle garden of the Casa de Tequilio Yupungo in 1884, which is less than 10 years after the excavation. And it's one of the earliest, well, it is the earliest known documentation of this part of the house known to us, and it shows things that you won't find in any other image of this peristyle. It shows the paintings on this garden wall over here. But the interesting thing is to compare it to the same garden as it is presented to us today, after the restoration works made in 2008, because they put roofs on things that are, well, of course we had roof in the portico, but I mean the garden rooms behind here have received also their small roofs now after the restoration, and it looks like some kind of small housing behind, which it was never intended to be, because we had probably had a second story here, and it doesn't show the state of the building in antiquity, but some kind of ameliorated way of showing it to the modern visitor, but not recalling the original idea of the architecture. And this takes us back to the importance of documenting Pompeii in its status as it is today, before too many alterations are made. And I mean, this is perhaps a funny thing to say, but I mean, we have had changes to this ancient architecture ever since 1748, when it started to be excavated. But now, I mean, the political situation is such that the things are sometimes going certainly going too slowly, but also going too fast. And again, we have this problem of communication between scholars making study and those responsible of the site, and the politicians working all over, and certainly more actors than that. So I go out of it and I show you how we try to go on with this documentation work. It took us, well, if we had the first phase, as I told you, on the web page I tried to explain to you in the beginning of my speech here, we have a continuation which started by chance, like everything seems to happen by chance when you have the people meeting interested and having experience in different fields. It took, by chance, I changed university in 2010, and then I encountered a team of people, of young Italian scholars interested in making 3D visualizations. And not only engineers, but also starting off as archaeologists and understanding the needs of an archaeologist, not just making technological feats. And what happened is that we started off in 2011, and we had 2 campaigns of loss and scanning in Insula 5.1. And then you should know that the photography used for the first website, for our website, we had a photographer working 6 to 12 weeks a year, and making these montages and making the photographs with a very specialized, very detailed scheme of where to start, and having equal lights and everything and so forth. Very long work. And now we took the scanners to Pompeii, and we have the whole insula scanned in less than a week. 2 campaigns. Now the result is not exactly the same, but we had also the first campaign, which is documented in these 2 slides, also show how technology advances quickly. This is the colleagues, engineers from the ISTI in Pisa. Well, I have the full name of this abbreviation in my last slide, so I won't try to mix it up for you today. But it's an institute which is belongs to the Italian CNR, Centro Nazionale della Ricerca, and we have Matteo Delipiani, Marco Caglieri, they are much older, much working with the ISTI scanner, and you can see it's a very heavy tool. And then we have Niccolo De Lunto from the Laboratory of Humanities of Lund University, with the last, at that time, last issue of the same on the same machine. But then he's showing up very easily how it can be handled. No heavier than a usual than a camera. And the first 3D model demos were accessible online thanks to the ISTI work. The engineers of the ISTI collaborating with Niccolo Di Lunto were able to, well, the first 3D models was ready already on site, but then it takes lots of post-processing to have them to let them become to have them being less heavy, and then also this is a technological feat to have them transmitted so you can see them online on the web. They succeeded to do that in 2012, and they had the first demos linked to our website. This address, you can see a tree, the atrium of the House of the Bronze Bull, the Nymphaeum, and the famous pipe, or the, not really a pipe, but the water distributor of the Nymphaeum that you've already seen. Well, work continued, and this is a plan showing all the different positions of the scanner over the whole insula. 330 scans acquired, though in less than 1 week. And, well, let's go on. So, you see the scanners also in this slide, and you see the model coming up. And I think this is, yeah, this is where I perhaps want to show you also the last feet. And then I have to go out again, just to show you what we then just received from the ISTI in just some weeks ago, or just before Christmas. Nice thing. And this is the model of the whole insula, Phi 1, with the navigation tool, small yellow thing down there, always, come on, showing the north. Super nice. And it can be moved around by means of this thing. You can put it wherever you want with it. And, well, maybe I should move it. I hope it will work. Well, over there, okay. Over there, nice. With the, into the, in this workshop. And from, or up into the Nymphaeum. And normally, he also made this link for us. So, no, well, this doesn't function as it should. Oh, it does. So it can take us back to our web page, where we can also read more about this particular. Oh, sorry, what did I do there? About this particular room, different kinds of photographs, and then you have the structures, the north wall, and so forth. We could give it a bigger presentation. Pleased wall. Back to our ordinary web page. I mean, when you work with the web page, it doesn't. I mean, this is must be kind of the university web, which doesn't want me to superimpose different images. But yeah, well, this is what it looks like. Should be coming up again. it to high resolution. This is a marvelous thing because you see the walls are so high in Pompeii, so it's very difficult to get an overview, and it's very difficult to know which walls really. I mean, you can do it by plan, but it's an enormous contribution when you're able to see a wall from two sides, and you can have this idea how they work, the two sides of the wall work together. You have to turn them around. This is not a model where you have the photographs on the model, so this is a 3D model without photographs. Directly what you receive, what we've received from the scanner. Back to the PowerPoint, I hope. Wow. Well, the plan was just finished, as you see, in October 2013. Henrik Boman. And really in December. The northern part of it was that we had an architect drawing it by hand in the traditional way. The southern part was, well, we couldn't pay him anymore starting off somewhere in 2008 or 2009. And then the southern part, the House of the Bronze Bull, was we just had to rely on old plans. But then with the laser scanning going on and finished in 2012, we were able to, when we had the whole insula line, we were also able to have the full plan drawn, and we also were also able, I think, to correct the plan made by the architect in some places. It's not always totally correct when you use traditional. No, I shouldn't do that. Continue. Well. Back in time a bit, before we had this whole insula line, when we started to import, when we had the first models made, we also started to glue on the pictures, the photographs made by our photographer during so many campaigns. And this is how we obtained a very nice 3D model showing almost as site. As you can see, we had in our base earlier, we only had the two-dimensional photographs wall by wall, but now we have the whole rooms, and also have succeeded to import the 3D model into a GIS system. I say this is for the future. This is also very new, made in October 2013. The Casa de Sicilia Jucundo, his house, inserted into a model which is no longer a flat plan, but it is the model made, the plan positioned on the level instructions given from satellite information by the Italian technology. And with imported into GIS, we also have the possibility of many new tools. We can make measurements like this, exact measurements given by us in meters. We can put in this pan of light. You see, where it is no longer totally, where it's giving this height to this niche, as you can see on this slide. And it can also be used to measure simple lines, like the niche itself. And also many new possibilities, like experimenting sight lines. For instance, you can put in a position anywhere at the level approximately eye level of a viewer or a person going into this insula or this house, and look at, for instance, the lararium niche at the end of the axial line from the entrance or wherever. I don't know what you wanted to see into this inside this small room, but still, just to show you the possibilities of this technology. Visualscape analysis and reconstructed building. We are also able to pass walls on specific points to see one side and the other side of the wall, and ask the GIS to go around and have a view on the other side. Those are the main actors. Maybe I let you read the names, and also have the exact reading of the ISTI, l'Istituto di Scienza e Tecnologie dell'Informazione a Faido, Pisa, are really big help to us. But I mean, the post-processing, which is also a rather slow thing, is done at Lund University Humanistic Laboratory. And then I'd like to finish off, because I think time is due soon. I finish off with a film and show. I haven't shown everything. I haven't. Let me see which one is. No, I didn't only find one of them here. Oh, let's try this one. See what happens. It's something. No. Well, it's coming, I think. Perhaps. Maybe.
Tryck på play. Trekanten längst där.
No, that. Yes, well, this is the second one, showing how to pass walls. We're inside the peristyle, one of the big triclinium, I'd say, opening towards the peristyle of the house of Cecilius Jucundus, and we have this old doorway here, and Niccolo is showing you how you could do to pass and to see what this exact part of the wall looks like on the other side. The other side is effectively the side, the triclinium side. This is a cubiculum here, and this drawing the outline of the doorway, and so wow. And then you have to indicate to the GIS the thickness of the wall that you want to pass, approximately. And then it starts to work. Well, you have to show it what to do, and you have the other side, and you can see exactly how the door once existed. I mean, this is certainly a doorway belonging to an earlier stage of this house. You can also measure how high it is exactly. Well, you already saw that. I think this is an extremely important thing in Pompeii, because it's so difficult to see from one side to another side, and when you pass from one house to another and they have a same wall between them, it's impossible with a meter to find out, and you don't have the ladder to go up because it's 4, 5, 6 meters. Do you think we could find the other film? Maybe inside here. Yeah, there it is. So I'll show you one more thing, one more greeting from my team. It is
Oh, I think it's playing behind.
Yeah, it is. Coming here. Maybe you could get it bigger. So this is what you see here going around. It's also the same house, Cecilius Jucundus, his atrium. We're going around as we were inside it almost. Beautiful mosaic floor, into the famous triclinium with its wall paintings. Now most of the central panels, of course, in the Museum of Naples. But you can still see the framework, famous framework, Lake Third Style. One of the high quality walls was of Pompeii. And Niccolo, what is wanted to show you here, what I am the intermediary to show you, is different kinds of analysis performed in the GIS. So some of them you already know, because they show you now how to measure. Again, sorry, I couldn't re-edit these films, but still, you see where the circle is broken. This is where you measure Well, this wasn't very interesting. Perhaps maybe he's going up again to show you the upper part of the painting on the triclinium wall. And you have the meter 3.775 meters above the floor level. Then we turn around again and show another possibility, that is drawing. You see the lararium here, the famous lararium, the earthquake lararium with its relief no longer in position, but still it was there once. Drawn, and continue to draw, I think, the walls, and he shows you can have the drawing any way you like also. You don't have it to have it like this, but you can change the kind of, or choose the kind of line that you like to have. So you can produce, the GIS can produce just any elevation that you like to have from the scan model. So this is something he would like to show to the superintendent as the possibility to document the state of the wall paintings or the plaster on the walls. When this, you could have a plaquette, whatever you say, iPad or whatever, and you could draw on in front of the wall, and then you can import it. You can decide what if it's a plaster, it's a painted plaster, it's an under plaster, whatever, it's no plaster at all, and you can give it different kinds of identification so that you can continuously supervise the state of erosion, because this is what we have. Pompeii and everywhere. What can you do? 1 square kilometer of ruins? Well, 1 square kilometer of non-ruined buildings is not easy to keep in shape. So ruin isn't any easier. Going around now the entrance to the house, and showing that no old documentation has been done in vain. You could import it into the GIS, and you can see how it really plays with the actual plan, the exact rendering of the scan. This is the plan, that's the things. We were cleaning the floors, of course, and this is the architect's drawing of the clean floors, ruined floors, but the clean floor surface of these workshops on both sides of the entrance to the house of Kekillis Jucundus, and you can see how it fits into the model. And you could also see that you have the height, the levels given by the architect from a leveling instrument, and here he shows that they can also be verified with the satellite when you have it into the GIS. Goodbye. Thank you.